In this episode of the Well Aware podcast, Dr. Lauren Grawert sits down with best-selling author and podcast host Laura Cathcart Robbins for an inspiring conversation about addiction, resilience, and recovery. Laura shares her journey from secrecy to self-discovery and reflects on the power of amplifying recovery content through her podcast, The Only One in the Room. Together, they explore what it means to live with a hidden addiction and why representation matters in the recovery space. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Well Aware podcast. I'm Dr. Lauren Grawert, Chief Medical Officer at Aware Recovery Care. And today I'm so excited to be joined by a very influential voice in the recovery space, Laura Cathcart Robbins. Laura is the author of a best-selling memoir called Stash, My Life in Hiding, and she's the host of a popular podcast called The Only One in the Room. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, Good Housekeeping, Today.com, and many, many more. She's also a TEDx speaker and sits on the Buckley School's DEI board committee, as well as a million other super cool things. So today we'll be hearing her recovery journey. Laura, thank you so much for joining us. Where does this podcast find you today?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you. I am in Los Angeles.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Well, your memoir goes into some fascinating themes that, quite frankly, I think are not discussed enough in addiction. You talk about kind of just the isolation of hiding from addiction. You talk about affecting kind of your personal life and high-profile divorce. Even about how kind of a Hollywood lifestyle really didn't change some of the fundamental pain of addiction. Can you just give us an overview of your story and kind of how it led you to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So Stash, My Life in Hiding is a memoir where I wrote about 10 months of my life in the year 2008. And the story opens with me basically asking for a divorce. I'm a mom of 2 boys. I am in a very high profile Hollywood marriage, as you said. And I'm also the Parent Association president at my kids' school. I've just been asked to join the board. At the same time that I'm asking for this divorce, I am bottoming out in an addiction to Ambien, which a lot of people go, what? Like, how can you get addicted to Ambien? Don't you just fall asleep? But that's a whole nother story. I mean, it's the same story, but it's a longer story of how that happened. But basically, I was prescribed this drug around 6 years earlier. It was a really good drug for me. It helped reset my system. Eventually, I couldn't sleep without it. And then I started abusing it and taking more and more. And so this is where you find me in the book. So that 10-month period is me getting a divorce, addressing my addiction, and the through line of it is really just trying to stay a custodial parent of my children. I wanted to make sure that I was able to stay in their lives, even though I was getting treatment for an addiction during a divorce.
Yeah, I love how I think I've seen you on social media talk about what is the concept of a successful divorce and what did that look like to you versus how that might be different to, let's say, your divorce attorney. I really admire just your authenticity and kind of sticking true to yourself. And I'd love to hear really maybe how that helped you in your addiction journey and where that came from. How was that instilled in you?
The authenticity?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just to briefly go back in my life, I had a very emotionally abusive stepfather around whom, when I was my authentic self, it would rub him the wrong way. And the home became violent, not physically violent toward me, but the home would become violent. So I learned very quickly to adjust and adapt so that whatever rubbed him the wrong way wasn't present. And then the home would remain calm. I also have often been the only Black person in whatever situation I'm in. When I was little, it was my school. I was the only Black kid in the entire school for a while. Eventually there were more, but I never had a Black classmate, which was actually okay. But I learned to code switch there. So I wasn't always my authentic self when I was at school. I kept a little of the Black culture bits back and just assimilated in. And then I would code switch back in my neighborhood, which was kind of lower middle class Black neighborhood, and leave out the kind of dominant culture, sayings and the things that we did at school. I would leave that behind so I could assimilate back there. So all of that throughout my life was kind of how I navigated life. It was seeing which part of me I needed to present and which part of me I needed to edit out for every situation. And so it wasn't until I got sober, which is now almost 17 years ago, that I really started looking at who I was and what I wanted and how I could live honestly as myself.
It must have been, it almost sounds like a different self for every situation that was slightly nuanced. And I'm sure you got really good at it. And I'm sure it was also just exhausting over time.
I mean, yeah, I think that I wasn't aware of the toll it took on me at first. It just kind of felt like my life. I think probably if I had thought about it, I would have thought everybody did it, that everybody was a work self or, a home self or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't think about it. I just, just kind of went through it. But it was very much after I had kids that the role exhaustion I was experiencing caught up to me. And it wasn't just not being or being a version of myself or not being true to myself. It was that I had so many selves, mom, volunteer, PA president, wife of, like all these things. All of those roles took an absolute toll on me. And it was so, yeah.
I'm curious, so what prompted you to decide I'm going to write this really vulnerable, really, really powerful, really raw memoir about difficult parts of my life? What prompted that? And how did you decide, okay, I'm ready to do this now?
When I was a little kid, really little, I think I started reading kind of adult theme books, the older, like high school aged or college age books when I was little. And I found that through those books, and I also read books that were age appropriate, but I read things like Gogol and Dostoevsky, and I read Toni Morrison and James Baldwin. And I was reading these things when I was, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, because they helped me navigate life. I knew how to do anything I ever knew how to do from reading it in a book, and writing it down is how I made sense of the way that I processed it. Writing it down actually was my process. That's how I processed anything. And so when I was going through all this in 2008, when I was, getting a divorce, when I was embarrassed and ashamed of being an addict who was also a mother, when I was afraid of letting everybody down, I am looking at going to treatment to deal with my addiction. I started looking for a book that would help me navigate that. That's what like I said, I've always done. And I found a couple. I didn't find anything that wasn't written by a white woman. And I was like, well, where are the books written by people who look like me? Like, there's got to be something here. Never found it. I did find solace in a few of those other stories that I found then, and that addressed different areas of the pain that I was going through. And they were really helpful. But 12 years later, when I was kind of looking at what kind of book I might write, I realized in just doing some research that there were still no books written from that intersection of privilege and race and addiction. There were plenty of books, in the past written by people of color about the kind of addiction that you see basically depicted in movies and on TV shows, drug dens, prostitutions, et cetera, et cetera. And that wasn't at all my story. And I thought this was a big missing chunk because, everyone I know, that's not true. Most of my friends look like me. Most of my friends live a very privileged life. Most of my friends dealt with a lot of the same things that I did, minus the addiction. But going through divorces, the pain of that, trying to be multiple people. And so I was just like, there's got to be a place for us to find ourselves in books. And so I ended up writing 30 pages of what became Stash, just to see what it looked like on the page. And I sent it out a couple of places and it got rejected. And then a friend of mine named Holly Whitaker, she wrote a book called Quit Like a Woman. It was this really big book it was said to be anti-AA, but it was really just like, why quit like all these old white men who did it in the 30s? Why don't we learn to quit like women? And it was a major, major success, New York Times bestseller. And she read those pages and sent them to her agent, who then signed me the next day and said, how quickly can you write this book?
How did that feel when you had that feeling?
It was so cool. It was like, I have a picture of me staring at the contract, like, and you can just tell that I'm not in my body. Like, it's like, I couldn't believe it happened. And I didn't know that it ever would happen. But, and when it did, it just happened so quickly.
Wow. Wow. And it sounds like, that feeling of being the only woman of color in a room even continued in your writing career. I mean, you talk about being like the only Black woman in a writer's retreat and kind of that prompting you to do the podcast. And I get the sense that you've taken some maybe isolating and painful experiences and turned it into almost like post-traumatic growth to help others. I mean, whether it be with your book, your podcast, and I wonder if you view it the same way. Like, I've had these painful experiences, and maybe here's some good that can come of it, i.e., talking about it more openly with others.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for anyone who has a painful experience, no matter how isolating that experience might feel, no matter like if when, I certainly thought I was the only person experiencing the pain that I was feeling that way, in the way that I was experiencing it. And what I think I found is that if I am, somebody else's, and if somebody else is, they're thinking they're alone too. And so writing these things, that writer's retreat that you talked about, I had a great experience at that writer's retreat, but it was a very dual experience.
Mm-hmm.
The other experience I had was a very solo one because I had no affinity at all in that group with regard to race. And I've, like I said, I've been the only one in the room most of my life, but never for that many days with that many people, 600 people, 3 days, day and night. It was really jarring. And, when I got back, I was like, do I say this out loud? Like, do I write this thing? Like, cause I don't see other people calling this out. And so I just kind of like dipped my toe in the water and sent it out to a couple people, just the idea. And it was like really quickly, like, have you sold this yet? I want to buy it. I was like, oh, good. I better write it. So I'm going to write it right now. And then it went live like the next day. It was insane. And then it went viral. Like the moment it hit the site, it went viral all over the world just immediately. And then, I created the podcast from that experience because it seemed like those stories needed to be told.
Yeah, I think you're really right. I mean, we on this podcast have interviewed several women who have written recovery journeys, but all white, to your point. Couple who have written from kind of that perspective of socioeconomic disparity, whether lower or whether upper, but never from maybe a combined, blended approach of being the other from a race perspective and from a socioeconomic perspective. So while you were talking about that, I was reflecting, yeah, we haven't. So to hear the overwhelming support and demand that your book received, to me, just really tells me there's a lot of people who this resonates with, and there's a lot of people who really need to hear this. What would you say to either a woman struggling with addiction or a Black woman struggling with addiction, just thinking, gosh, here's somebody who really has it together. Where do I even start?
Yeah, it's quite a journey to look like you really have it together. And I do have it together. I really do, but it took years and years. And, when I first got sober, that was my priority. I didn't write or read for pleasure for the first 5 years of my sobriety, only because I couldn't. And I kept like thinking it'll come back to me because it was such a big part of my identity, right? As a prolific reader and writer. And I just couldn't concentrate long enough to read a passage or just I could read a passage. I couldn't read pages of a book. And so I just concentrated on staying sober and being the best mom that I could be because my kids were still really little then. And that was enough. That's all I could do at that time. The writing came later. I started writing after that 5-year mark. Again, I started taking classes. And I think the thing that I would say, and I got a lot of rejections and there's like a whole, I just kept going anyway. Like I got all these rejections. I took all the rejections as a call to action. One person that rejected a very meaty book proposal that I gave her. said, you're a beautiful writer, but memoir is the hardest thing to sell. And I cannot sell yours, no matter how beautiful it may be, because no one knows who you are. And so she suggested that I started creating all these elements of an author's platform, which was a new term for me at that time. And so I started doing it. I blogged every week for 2 years. I started writing and publishing articles. I created the podcast. I started doing storytelling and won a moth. Like all these things I didn't even know about. I just started finding out about them, networking, going to different conferences and festivals, meeting other people who could help. But that was all, years into sobriety, and certainly not to say that you can't do both. A lot of people do. But for me, the journey was I needed to just concentrate on being sober because I really didn't want to be. I wanted to be able to do 50 other things rather than that. I didn't want to be labeled as anything. I didn't want to be the one who'd failed. I didn't want to be the one who was succeeding and got cheered on. I just wanted to be normal, which I understand now is average to the population. And the population of my peers at that time, no one was getting sober and everyone looked like they had it together. And so I wanted to be like them and I wasn't, but I went anyway. I went to recovery meetings. I stayed away from the things that, oh my goodness, sleeping was so hard. I just switched subjects because I was thinking about how did I sleep without the sleeping pill that I became addicted to. And it was just excruciating for like the first year. The sleeping pill withdrawal, don't take sleeping pills more than 10 days in a row. It's so hard to get off of them. But I did it. When I sleep through the night now, I never thought I could sleep through the night. I started sleeping through the night about 2 years in. And, like I said, I'm almost 17 years in and I still sleep through the night. But it's just, not being afraid of the discomfort, leaning into discomfort, because I found it to be really uncomfortable. I also don't like being the center of attention. And I found that I was a lot because I was the identified patient and I didn't like that. So like my ego was quite big. I didn't have a lot of humility. And I think what happened as time went on was the ego deflated, my humility grew. And I was able to kind of be among the people as one of them instead of feeling like I was separate from for X amount of reasons. And I had so many reasons why I didn't belong anywhere that I was.
One thing that comes to mind as you're talking is this traditional definition we have of addiction versus maybe how it's really different in reality. And you've commented onto this before. The medical definition of addiction really is continued use of a substance or behavior despite negative consequences. And I would argue, to your point, it's really more like defining sobriety is more helpful, which is truly, I think, most simply the ability to tolerate distress or discomfort of any kind without self-medicating, whether it be with a self-medicating unhealthy behavior or a self-medicating unhealthy substance. But you really sound like you've found ways to tolerate distress and discomfort without the Ambien. Was that hard in the beginning? And maybe what were some that worked for you? Sorry, that's a double question. I asked you two questions at once.
First of all, I really like that definition of sobriety. I'm going to definitely keep that because I think that's it. It's when things are good, but actually when things were good, sometimes when I was engaged in drinking and using, that would be a reason to use. Oh, I'll give myself a little treat now. Or that's how I thought of it too. I thought of it as little treats. But I really like that definition that you gave. Well, like I said, sleeping was excruciating. I actually had a therapist that helped me with sleep. And one of the things she said was, I didn't like this either, but she told me, she's like, oh yeah, don't worry about sleep. Actually, plan on not sleeping for like the next 6 months. So find some books that you're dying to read after the kids go to bed. Maybe, there's some shows that you really want to watch. Make that your time. Just plan on staying up all night. No one ever died from staying up all night. And she was like, so she's like, you could have hot chocolate, like you could just like make a whole like me time out of it. And so I did. I did that for 3 nights. I think the first night I fell asleep around 2 for about an hour and a half, which was good. The second night I slept for a little bit longer and fell asleep earlier. And the third night, I think I slept from 12 to 6, which was unheard of for me. So, and now I sleep from like 11 to 7. Like that's my sleep time. So it's 11:30 to 7. And so but that just the idea of it, because, and you know this probably better than I do, but the idea of not being like, it's bedtime and I'm not asleep yet. It's like I get anxious, which means adrenaline is like pumping through my body, which then makes it impossible for me to go to sleep because my body's like, let's go, like what's happening? And then, the melatonin stopped producing for me for years because the Ambien took over. So my brain didn't have the ability to naturally produce melatonin. And then I have all this anxiety around sleeping, which gives me, so I have a lack of a drug in my head and a drug being produced in my body. And I didn't even need any outside drugs. I was really messed up from that. And so that there's, the tools that I've learned, back to your question, meditating, which I really did not want to do either. But I would do it in the mornings. I still do it in the mornings. And when I was having trouble sleeping, I would do it at night and really concentrate on my breathing. There was a 4-count inhale, 4-count hold, 4-count exhale. That was really helpful to me. It just seemed to bring everything down inside me. It didn't stop my mind, but it stopped my body, I think, from producing as much of whatever it was producing that was making me anxious. And if I kept doing that, eventually I found that I drifted off. The other thing that is really helpful to me, which you kind of touched on in the beginning, is I tell the truth about everything. And what I found was that lying about stuff caused me more anxiety because I don't identify as an anxious person. And I didn't really experience that until I started going through withdrawal and started kind of like hustling and obsessing over Ambien. But prior to that, I would have said that I'm not an anxious person. So that was a new experience for me and a very unwanted one. And so what I realized after I got sober was like, hey, if I tell the truth, I don't get anxious about what people are going to find out, or, I just feel like cleaner at the end of the day. Like I don't have any messes to go back and clean up because I take care of everything as it happens. For the most part, certainly there are things that I've left to the next day to take care of, or even later. But for like my everyday stuff, I'm cleaning up as I go along. And I'm telling you the truth. I don't say I'm 5 minutes away when I haven't left my house yet, which is something I used to do a lot, which I understand now falls into the category of people pleasing, which I also don't identify as a people pleaser. But apparently I'm engaging in all these behaviors unknowingly. And so now, the thing that keeps me from needing to treat stress with something like Ambien or alcohol or whatever is to not get stressed at all. If I don't leave late for something, if I leave early, I'm not crazy when somebody cuts me off because I'm going to be late. I'm like, I'll let you in. I have all the time in the world. It's a lot less stressful driving that way.
Yeah. Gosh, and I guess especially in LA of all places.
Yes.
I'm in DC and I hear the traffic in DC is only rivaled by the traffic in LA. So
True.
Totally empathize with that. Well, Laura, thank you so much for being with us today, for sharing your story, really for sharing your story with the rest of the world. I mean, it's such a powerful story. And for those of you listening, if you're on social media, definitely follow Laura because I feel like I had therapy on my phone the past couple hours going through so many of your great sayings and your great advice. And so you're such a gift to the world. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share before we wrap up today?
Wow. Thank you for all that. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And I guess, my final thought would be to, I'm trying to think of something really good. Something that people are going to like rush and write down in their notes on their phone. Yeah. So my final thought would be, don't let your feelings are like children. You don't want them to drive the car, but you don't want to throw them in the trunk either. And what I try to do myself is not to let my feelings dictate my actions. And I try not to make any decisions out of fear.
I love that. As a fellow mom that with little kids now really resonates with me. And that's a great rule to go by. Don't keep them in the trunk. Don't let them drive you. It's gotta be something in the middle. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Well Aware podcast. If you're interested in learning more about Laura's story, you can find Stash, My Life in Hiding, on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Her podcast, The Only One in the Room, is available anywhere you get your podcast. And thank you so much for joining us, those of you who are listening, for the honor of your time. And until next time, take care of yourself.